This is the Energy Makers Show, featuring the innovators, financiers, and policymakers focused on the global energy demand. Brought to you by NRG, moving clean energy forward. And here's your host, Russ Capper.
Hi, I'm Russ Capper, and welcome to another episode of the Energy Makers Show, episode number 100. And our guest today is Fred Lawrence, the Vice President of Economics and International Affairs with the Independent Petroleum Association of America, sharing his perspective on the IPAA, the role of independence in the history of the United States oil and gas space, and his viewpoint on the tremendous transformation of oil and gas production in the U.S. All of that right after this.
At BKD, we understand the constantly shifting nature of the energy industry. As a national CPA and advisory firm, we serve energy clients from the beginning to the end of the cycle. Our experienced energy advisors serve approximately 300 energy companies in exploration, midstream, downstream, oilfield services, and power production. Plus, we're the largest North American member of the Praxity Global Alliance, which means we can help you wherever you operate. Contact a BKD advisor or visit us online to learn more.
This is the Energy Makers Show, brought to you by NRG, moving clean energy forward. And now, back to the Energy Makers Show with your host, Russ Capper.
Welcome back to the Energy Makers Show. My guest now is Fred Lawrence, Vice President of Economics and International Affairs with the Independent Petroleum Association of America. Fred, welcome to the Energy Makers Show.
Thank you very much.
You bet. Tell us about the IPAA.
The IPAA was formed in the 1920s, so we've been around for a long time, as have independents in this country. When we talk about independence, we're looking at the upstream oil and gas operations, the small, medium-sized companies that drill the majority of this country's oil and natural gas wells. We focus specifically on lobbying, on legislative, regulatory items for the industry, also provide networking and business development for close to 10,000 independent producers in the U.S.
Okay. When you talk about the independent producers upstream, I can't help but reflect on an interview that we did with Dr. Michael Economides about 3 months ago. And he so applauds that group because he describes the transformation from peak oil and energy crisis to where we are today is hugely attributable to the independent producer. What do you think of that?
I think he's absolutely right. The independents played the key role in this transformation that's taken place, and it was disruptive innovation, essentially twining two very important technologies, hydraulic fracturing and horizontal drilling, to access new geological horizons for both shale gas and tight oil. And what happened with George Mitchell, the unconventionals, as they call it, the shales, turning into tight oil more recently, has been primarily driven by independents. The majors generally were looking for larger conventional reserves. They left to go look for the bigger fields outside the country in the 80s and 90s. And during that time, the independents became much more active in those fields that they left behind. The specific DNA of the independent was critical because they had the entrepreneurship and the technological acumen to figure out how to develop these wells. They drilled a lot of wells, they did a lot of tests, and they weren't afraid to take risk. And that led to the development of the Barnett Shale, and since then a proliferation of shale gas plays and now tight oil plays.
Well, what's it like to be in the IPAA while all of that was going on?
I feel like it's such a transformational time. I was a history major, first and foremost, before economics.
Right.
And I remember when I went into this job, my grandfather said, "There's no oil left in this country. What's my grandson doing? He's not a farmer, and I don't think he's an oil man because we don't have oil left." But actually we do. And being in this sector to watch what's going on as a history major is fascinating. To hear the technologies, to see the companies at work, to look how they're experimenting with new technologies still. So I'm fascinated every day by what our members are doing in plays spanning the country from the Barnett Shale to the Bakken, to the Permian Basin and the Utica and the Marcellus in the Northeast.
Well, it is very impressive. In fact, it brings up another comment that Dr. Michael Economides made on the show. And he contends that this success should be celebrated like we do, and that it should also be a populist movement. It's not, just a Republican. The Democrats ought to be applauding it. And it's a little bit disconcerting that it's not viewed that way.
Politics is politics, and there's perception as well, and the industry has always tangled with this perception over the history of the industry from the days of Standard Oil to the present. Right. And despite the successes, which I believe are transformational in the economic sense, in terms of jobs, in terms of revenues, in terms of our trade balance, and especially in terms of the geopolitical leverage, national security implications that the United States and North America as a trading group has now over the rest of the world. And others are starting to realize that. Russia is starting to realize, the IEA is realizing, OPEC is realizing, and they've been slow. IHS realized it many years before those institutions, countries, organizations, and I think it just shows that everyone looks at this differently. And we have to be cognizant of the fact that there will be populist pressures, environmentalist concerns, and how this revolution is managed and how it's extended into the future. I'm very excited by the potential. I think we're in the very early innings. I do not talk about energy independence because I think we'll always be involved in a larger energy concept as trade partners, as importing and exporting depending what we need at the time. But it gives us that much more leverage in terms of ability to play in the resource trade, which I think is increasingly important, whether you're a developing country or a developed country.
Well, Amy Myers-Jaffe was on the show, golly, maybe 2 years ago, talking about the geopolitics of this transition. That's just huge, gigantic, and what has happened, and we're in such a better place now.
We are, and I respect Amy for her work. She's been a yeoman in this area of energy security for many years. And I think a lot of people don't quite understand what is happening as the U.S. becomes more involved in exporting, whether it's natural gas liquids, whether it's petroleum products, whether it's natural gas in the future, whether it's even crude oil, if we change our trading restrictions based on that fuel. We all of a sudden have an optionality that few other countries have.
So how are the Russians and Chinese dealing with this, not feeling like they're part of this transformation?
Very, very differently based on their situation. For example, the Chinese are part of our growing demand in the future. China and India represent almost 90% of demand growth going forward. So China is looking at this as we need to get involved as a joint venture in this success. We need to learn these technologies. We need to become better at applying it here at home. And we realize how energy security directly relates to our economy and thus our political stability. China understands that. There's a triangulation where energy plays a key role, and it relates directly to national security and political stability. Russia is looking at this as we have a new threat in terms of someone competing, for example, for our export markets. All of a sudden, the United States is setting records in terms of petroleum products, in terms of natural gas liquids. There's potential for natural gas. All of a sudden, Gazprom, Russia is going from denial to skepticism. And it's very interesting to see this sea change in terms of their perspective of what's happening over here. The Middle East, OPEC, is very cognizant of what's going on, but it was interesting to note in their World Energy Outlook, they haven't even really started to talk about the tight oil revolution here, and only in their 2012 issue did they start to talk about the unconventional natural gas. So they're very late to the party, whereas folks like IHS have been saying this has been going on for years.
All right, and we'll be back with more with Fred Lawrence, Vice President of Economics and International Affairs with the Independent Petroleum Association of America.
Welcome to another episode of The Future of Water in Unconventionals, brought to you by IHS and CAP Resources.
Hi, I'm Aaron Horn with CAP Resources.
And I'm Sarah Fletcher with IHS.
IHS and CAP Resources have partnered to publish 2 joint reports, both on water management, one targeted to the operators, the oil and gas producers, and the other to the service industry and the investment community.
Water management is a critical part of oil and gas development, both because it has a dramatic impact on well economics and also for operators to ensure that they're gaining the traction that they need within their communities to continue to develop their resources. We found that there are all kinds of considerations at stake: economic, operational challenges, technology, regulatory trends, and operators really need all of that information at their fingertips together in a cohesive format.
And if you're an operator, if you're drilling for oil and gas and you're managing a lot of water, just one good idea because of the magnitude of the amount of water you're spending on water management for fracs. Just one good idea from some other player in some other region can save you hundreds of thousands of dollars, even millions of dollars a year in your water management cost. And if you're a service company or in the investment community, just one bad investment can bury you. And no one learning from the mistakes that other people have made and the trends that we see going forward, pulling from the knowledge that we've collectively gathered, this report can help you make smart investments and help steer you away from bad ones.
That's right, and I think that's why we've included both case studies from your on-the-ground experience that CAP Resources bring to the table, as well as the economic analysis and industry-wide data that IHS has at its fingertips.
So we have two reports, one for water management strategies and one for market opportunities. Contact us for more information.
And for more information on water management strategies and water market opportunities in the continental U.S., go to ihs.com/waterunconventionals. This is the Energy Makers Show, brought to you by NRG, moving clean energy forward. And now, back to the Energy Makers Show with your host, Russ Capper.
All right, continuing on with Fred Lawrence, Vice President of Economics and International Affairs with the International Petroleum Association of America. I often contend that the general public in the United States does not come close to comprehending the value of energy in general, and specifically oil and gas, and the impact, the positive impact it has on the economy when we have it in abundance, and the negative impact when we don't.
And I think I grew up in the Northeast, and this is all largely a part of how we're conditioned in the people's views around us. Looking at the $1 trillion potential of energy in terms of jobs, the indirect jobs, the induced jobs, and the ripple effect of these plays and what they're doing for not only the locales but the states and our national economy are huge. And I think a lot of people aren't willing to see that, which is interesting because they would look at farming in such a light, but they would also look at it as, are we feeding ourselves first? So these views and these perspectives become very political, they become very local, and they become very economic based on these regions and the needs of these voters. So I think many people are reluctant to look at some of the overall successes if they have individual needs, and those individual needs will shape their votes and their perspectives on energy if they're not seeing themselves as part of the success.
You know, it seemed to be along the way, as it started becoming obvious to people in Houston at least, that the momentum in this increased production was really significant, that it seemed like the politics on the other side of the issue sort of saw it and realized, well, we don't want to stop it because it's creating so many jobs and it's lowering costs in some perspective, and it started almost feeling like it was bigger than politics. Do things like that ever get discussed at IPAA?
I think they do, but I think we also have to focus on the individual specifics that will affect our day-to-day. We can be ideologues, but we also need to focus on what is the impact of intangible drilling cost and percentage depletion and the impact on our producers. So we try to focus more on the concrete items that we can hopefully change and impact through our efforts on the Hill, with the media, with communications. So I think we do look at the big picture, but we also need to be very focused on the individual battles, the tactics that we can use to move along slowly. Because I think we're not going to pull a rabbit out of a hat here and change the perspective of the industry or change everyone's opinion in states like Vermont or California. We need to move very slowly, and we also have to let the results prove themselves. And I think in some states, such as California, there are some positive impacts. There's the Monterey Shale play. There's a lot more impact from this sector. And I think if you look at the jobs that have been created over the last 5-6 years while we've had the recession and the recovery,
right,
many of those jobs are directly related to oil and natural gas. We are the growth engine of the United States economy to a large degree.
Right. We had Lee Fuller on the show about 6 months ago from IPAA, and he had several descriptions of going up to the Hill. And do you go up to the Hill too?
Not in his professional capacity. I'm a support team, so if they need an economist or someone to talk about more of the supply and demand side of the market, I would join them. And Lee, of course, is an expert on many items such as hydraulic fracturing and tangible drilling costs, he really gets into the weeds. So I could never compete with Lee in his very in-depth knowledge of these topics. But trying to talk about some of the jobs impact, revenue impact, that's where I'd come in.
Okay, now the word international is also in your title. We talked about geopolitics, but I assume it's beyond that. What does the IPAA, what is their focus internationally now?
Well, it's two-handed. On one hand, we like to keep track of what's going on internationally because oil and increasingly natural gas are becoming global markets, and they will continue to be global markets. So things that are happening in Egypt and Libya and Iraq, they affect us here at home, regardless of whether or not we're active internationally. A lot of our members are starting to come back from overseas and focus more on the lower 48 shales, the tight oil plays. We're seeing that, as well as the majors coming back and focusing more on the lower 48 plays.
Which is really interesting.
Which is amazing.
Yes.
In the joint ventures, national oil companies are coming back as well. So there's a free-for-all. We have a new competitive advantage in the world because of the technologies that we have figured out where others are still trying to figure out and apply to their own shale resources. Independents are coming back, but we find that there are still opportunities overseas for those companies that have special niche skills, scalability. For a lot of these projects, you need size, you need capital budget that you can handle those large plays. And increasingly, that's a factor we're seeing here as some of these plays get built out. It's larger companies are needed with deeper capital abilities to really extend the frontiers of these plays, such as the Permian or the Bakken, where it feels like they've only uncovered the rind of the potential, and they're getting into other geological zones and using technologies to impact those zones. More money will be needed, so that scalability of larger companies, of national oil companies, will also come into play. There's a complementarity of sorts between these players.
All right, we'll be back with more with Fred Lawrence, Vice President of Economics and International Affairs with the Independent Petroleum Association of America.
This is the Energy Makers Show, brought to you by NRG, moving clean energy forward. And now, back to the Energy Makers Show with your host, Russ Capper.
All right, continuing on with Fred Lawrence, Vice President of Economics and International Affairs with the Independent Petroleum Association of America. Okay, Fred, so what kind of market dynamics do you see taking place right now?
I think one of the largest dynamics taking place along with the tight oil plays that are coming online in the very large differential between oil and natural gas price and natural gas liquids is portfolio restructuring towards oily plays.
Okay.
And of course those plays also have liquids such as condensates and natural gas liquids, which are priced accordingly. So this is a trend that we're certainly seeing among our members in terms of Chesapeake, EOG, Pioneer becoming a little more focused on the oily portfolio versus natural gas. But we're also seeing a lot of folks try to stock up on natural gas for the future because they believe there's a lot of potential in these plays. And despite the fact that there's a huge price disconnect between the two, they see promise for natural gas in the years ahead.
That's interesting because the shift probably is sort of based upon the price, meaning gas was too low, and this might sort of bring it back up too. But you're saying there's people that say, well, it is low, but there's still economics there.
Absolutely. They want to hold on to this natural gas despite the price of today. And if you look at a game changer such as export, this could really change the dynamics in terms of our natural gas price. which is very low compared to the natural gas price in South Korea or Spain, Asia, what they're paying. So there might be some global tightening in the future, depending on LNG exports and how that entails.
Well, Fred, I really appreciate you sharing your perspective with us here on the Energy Maker Show.
Happy to be here. Thank you for the opportunity.
You bet. And that wraps up my discussion with Fred Lawrence, the Vice President of Economics and International Affairs with the Independent Petroleum Association of America. And that wraps up this episode of the Energy Maker Show, heard on the radio and seen right here at TheEnergyMakers.com.